All righty. It looks like we are going live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's event with V.E. Schwab and Patricia Riley. I'm Rebecca from One More Page Books, and I'm just seeing all of these comments that have come in from when we're going live. So thank you all so much for being here. We are so happy to have V.E. Schwab with us tonight. We go way back, being One More Page. I think we had an event for the archived, like way back in the way back.
Way back
when. In the way back when. And obviously you all know many of her works. She's the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the acclaimed Shades of Magic series, the Villain series, The Savage Song, Our Dark Duet. I can go on and on and on.
Too many books.
It's too many books. They've been featured in the New York Times, Entertainment Weekly, the Washington Post, and more, and have been translated into more than a dozen languages, and have been optioned for television and film. Lots of exciting things. And joining us tonight with Victoria is our other dear friend, Patricia Riley, editor, writer, fabulous person extraordinaire. I love them both so much. So a quick note on how this is going to go, and then I'm going to disappear and let these wonderful ladies take it away. If you have any questions for the audience Q&A later, you can drop them in the comment box on YouTube. And I'll be going through and picking some of the really good ones for V to answer. And unfortunately, we probably won't get to everybody's, but drop them in there anyway. And hopefully yours will get picked. Yeah, I think that's it for me. So I will disappear and let you all take it away.
You're going to become the voice of God.
I'm going to become the voice of God.
Oh my goodness. Patricia.
Hi.
First of all, we have to discuss the elephant in the room, which is this plushie that I will be holding all night because it makes me happy. And it's a plushie. It's a squishable plague doctor that I ordered back in the early days of the apocalypse. So I will, if you see like these weird little eyes just pop up here.
Being visited by the plague doctor. I love it.
How are you?
How are you? I'm so excited to see your face. It's been, a year so far.
I know. It's been a year. This week has been a year.
That is very true. But I will say, I'm so excited that we finally get to talk about ADDIE. It's obviously we've been talking about it non-spoilery for a really long time. I don't have quite as many copies as you.
No one should.
But I do think that multiple people have commented on the fact that like they were like, "Oh, you set up her books," and I was like, "No, this is just what is in my bedroom."
Well, and I think what I want everyone to make sure, and I feel like most people probably who are here tonight do know this at this point, is like you are, aside from my mother, my one and only beta reader, and then the only person that I trust with all of the broken fragments of my stories going back to the Near Witch.
That is true. For better or worse.
Better or worse, a long time. And like truly, I have such like a weirdly intimate relationship with my editors creatively at this point that I really do send them the first draft. So you see the thing that precedes the first draft. You not only see the thing that precedes the first draft, you see all of this, like all of my fear, all of my anxiety, all of my neuroses, all of my late night panics. You have receipts for all of it.
This is accurate. This is very accurate. I've really enjoyed, I got to hang out, like, you know, in a couple of your other events this week. And it's always really funny to me watching you talk about process and hearing all the things that you fundamentally understand about your process.
Because you wouldn't think it in the moment at
because
all.
I'm just like, can I record this? So that when she's like, but that's not how books are made. It's like, actually, this really famous writer said that's how books are made.
Okay. In my defense, and I think this is something that we will talk about, is like, you get, it's like staring at the wrong focal length, right? Like when you're writing a thing, you're just far too close to that thing to have any sort of rationale. And so you require a Patricia in your life to be like, oh, hello, stage 3. We have been here before. Yeah. Let me turn back the clock 9 months to the last time you said it, and 16 months to the time before that, and 4 years to the time before that.
Now,
so
I will give you some credit. And that is that ADDIE was a different situation.
Yes.
And that's actually one of the things I wanted to have you talk about, because we've talked about it, obviously. But the thing about ADDIE is I feel like we've had over the years so many phone calls usually where it's like, I have this new idea. And, you know, you have like the kernel of the idea in this conversation. And it's like, this is before you've started like simmering, planning any of it. But normally the process is you have that, and then within a couple of months, that becomes the project on deck. With ADDIE, from the first time which I think we were in person the first time you told me about ADDIE, but the first time you talked about ADDIE, you knew inherently that this was not going to be the next project, and that it wasn't going to be the project for a while. And so I wanted you to talk about why that, like how you knew, what the difference was from the very beginning.
I knew I wasn't ready. And that's like a really weird thing to say, because anyone who knows me knows how deeply impatient I am creatively. Like I get an idea and I'm like, and now the idea should be done. Why is it not done yet? Like I have a tattoo on my body that I got when I was 19 that has a typo in it. And I will not let myself correct the typo because it's a lesson to me in my own impatience. And yet from go with ADDIE, you know what it is? I heard an author say once that we write the same story over and over again, that like every author has one story that they're writing. And that whole, like they will write it in every book that they ever write. And that will be their catharsis, right? That the writing of it. And so for me, I feel like the outsider insider narrative, it's the thing I'm always writing. But every now and then you get an idea and you know, oh, I only get to do this once. Mm-hmm. And I think I knew from the beginning that with the shape I wanted ADDIE LARUE to take and the things I wanted to talk about, it was once. And because I only got to do this thing one time, it needed to be right. Now, it needed to be right to the point where, and you witnessed this, I became paralyzed by the fear of doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. But for the first several years of the almost 10 that it would take, it was like pieces weren't there yet. I didn't have the right ending. I thank God I didn't write this book when I was 25 because the ending would have been so awfully problematic. But like, I didn't have the right ending. I didn't have the right voice. I didn't have the right structure. I could always find an excuse not to write it. And that's because it was a really beautiful thing to think about writing. Mm-hmm. And because I had all these other projects in the foreground that were due, I didn't have the pressure to write it. And I'm not sure. And that's the weird thing to think about, is that ADDIE LARUE was conceived of in the background of every other book that I published.
Like Vicious.
Every one of them.
I mean, like Vicious was like that also, in the sense that it was a background, like much quicker.
3 years.
Yeah, but it was in the background. Like it developed as a way to like have a distraction that was also something productive, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think something happened like 5 to 6 years in with ADDIE where I just started to realize like it was so precious to me that maybe I didn't want to write it. Like maybe I wanted it to be an idea because I was going to lose something in the translation from idea to first draft, as you always do. And I was really scared of that loss. And then about year 8, I hit that point of like, oh shit, I'm going to die without writing this book. Like I truly am I had the Henry crisis of it all, where I just was like, I am not going to survive this. Like, this is going to be the book that was like, oh, the play that was never finished, the book that was never written. And that devastated me. And that was really like the catalyst that took it from afraid to write the book wrong to afraid to not write the book at all. But a decade almost. Good Lord.
It's funny because it's so eloquent now to like explain that situation. And I don't feel like it quite captures the like years of angst that each of those phases took.
And let us not forget the, like Patricia, you bore witness, you, Jenna, and my mother bore witness to the very unique breed of hyper angst that happened when I actually started writing it. Because once I committed to writing it, every single day was awful, because every single day I was fighting a battle with myself before I ever got to the page. And I was losing that battle. And you and my mother and my surrogate sister, Jenna, like dragged me forward through this fear, because every day I thought to myself, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. You're doing it wrong. You should have left it untouched. You're ruining it by creating it.
But it's also, I think it was a hyper example of your whole process anyway. Because so much of it was every phase of how you normally are.
Yeah.
With ADDIE, because ADDIE was so important to you, it was 10 times as
dialed. It was dialed all the way up.
It was just how much of yourself you put into it.
Well, and like a weird amount, right? Because I remember early on. So there's this, and this will be a spoiler-free chat, everybody. So don't worry. This is a weird format in that I can't see anybody or you talking, so you chatting. This will be spoiler-free, but the weirdness of it was like, so there are 3 main characters. There's ADDIE, the devil, and Henry. Henry's our human boy. And like, I was terrified of writing Henry because on the surface, Henry could go so wrong. He could become the like white male privileged cisgender millennial, like just can't get his shit together kid. And so talking about how much of myself I put into this book, it's really counterintuitive that it's not that I put too much of myself into Addie or the devil. I put myself into Henry.
Yeah.
And that scares me so much still right now. It's the reason I like really am careful around the reviews, because I can take people not liking the plot. I can take people not liking the ending, but like I wrote Henry as who I would have been if I hadn't found writing.
But also, like, who's going to come for Henry? Like,
nobody better come for Henry.
Nobody's
Nobody.
going to come for Henry.
Okay,
Henry's like
are
the cinnamon
entitled.
roll of cinnamon rolls, I feel like.
He's just so sad.
I love
This
it.
is not a spoiler. Henry struggles with being alive.
Yeah, Henry is that human. But I think that the thing about, I mean, obviously we've talked at length about the fact that of all the years this book could have come out, this is obviously a difficult one. It's difficult not to be able to all be together in person to celebrate like what has been a 10-year, accomplishment for you. I mean, it's so hard not being there in person. But I think also we've talked about the fact that in so many other ways, it was the perfect year for Addie. Addie specifically, because so much of Addie, we've all had experiences now that are going to bring so many things in Addie to light, and how hard it is to be a human through Henry, I feel like is the primary one.
Poor Henry. I think I've like been watching on Instagram that Henry's been causing the most existential crises in readers. Like Henry's been causing the most like, I did not sign up for this. I signed up for a deal with the devil story. How dare you take all of my anxieties and like emotional frailties and put them in a person and then feed that person to me. No, I mean, we talked about this a lot. I really was very sad in the beginning because nobody, of course, predicted this year. And when you're writing a book, whether you're writing it over the course of a year or a decade, you certainly can't really control any of the context that book comes out into. Mm-hmm. And this was going to be and is still, I have to rephrase that, the biggest book of my entire career. Like, and not in that any of my other books were small, but it's been this gradual staircase. Mm-hmm. Addie represented a huge number of accomplishments for me and a huge number of ambitious decisions, right? If I'm a tree, she and Shades of Magic or Vicious are on opposite branches, but I had all these things were going to be firsts for me. I got invited to like headline a book festival that had never blinked at me before. I was going to have like the year was going to be, and we talked about this with my publicist, Kristen, like it was going to be a year-long celebration of a decade of work. Mm-hmm. And obviously it didn't get to take shape that way. And it's so interesting. So I went through this little brief period of self-sadness and mourning. And then I realized, like, as people began to read the arc, that this, as you said, it might be the right year for this book, because it's, when you look at it, it's a book about stubborn hope and defiant joy. It's a book about an uncertain future. It's a book about what it takes to thrive when trapped in an eternal present with a lot of fear. And like, it's a book about loneliness. It's a book about isolation. It's like all of these things, but at its heart is a very hopeful, triumphant tale about the kind of ideas we need to espouse in order to survive.
I think also it's one of those things where, like we were saying, we've all had this year of loneliness. So the other thing that's really wonderful is to have this escape. Like this book, I mean, all of your books are, an escape. It's something people always talk about, I feel like, with your writing, is how much they fell into the story, the world fell away. Addie is different, though. Addie is like an experience. And the thing is, like you said, I obviously read Addie in micro pieces, which it's really funny because I feel like I get the comment all the time, oh, you're so lucky. But I always want to, like, in a nice way, push that back on people who, had to put the book down at chapter 4 and were like, oh, I can't wait to get back to it. Like, what if the book ended at chapter 4?
I know, I'll send you a chapter and then you'll come back and be like, great, so can I have the next chapter now? And I'm like, it's not written yet. And you're like, what the hell?
There's no joy in that. But I will say that Addie is an experience. There's so many roads within Addie that I feel like one of the other wonderful things about it coming out this year is it's coming out in a year when people need to go somewhere. They need to get out of themselves, out of their space, even if it's just for like the length of a book. And it's like long book. So
yeah, it could have been so much longer. But you know what's interesting? You point this out, and it just makes me think of the fact that maybe the reason that Addie is causing some existential crises is because it is an escape, but it doesn't let you get too far from yourself. Like there's a really famous quote, and I don't know how to attribute it right now. It's after midnight. I'm drinking whiskey and I haven't had dinner. But the idea is that like no matter how far you go, you're still with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like you take yourself everywhere. Yeah. And I think one of the things that's kind of surprised a lot of readers is that in a lot of ways, sure, this is an escapist novel, but at the same time, like it kind of just holds a mirror up to
you're there too.
Mirrors. Like,
no, but I think it's a really wonderful thing. And I think, you know, you, like you said, you've put little pieces of yourself in, and we've talked through like each book, because it's what I think makes letting the books go a little bit hard, depending on like which piece of yourself you put in. And then also the decision that you've made over the years, particularly in the early books, whether to talk about that piece or not, whether to make it known to other people who didn't know you well, what piece that was. And I think that the amount of change in how open you've chosen to be online over the last couple of years, which is amazing. I mean, so many people have talked about and continue to talk about on a daily basis what that means to them, to have you be honest and to have you share your experiences so they feel like they can relate. But I feel like that complicated this book in particular a little bit because people could draw those conclusions more easily.
Yeah, it's weird because, and it's so weird that you say that because I didn't really think about the fact that like I'm always a little bit in my books, usually in the anxiety and the depression and the fear and the spiraling and all of those good things, but I usually don't call attention to them. Mm-hmm. And I think this, like, I think about really it changed around this Savage song where I was very open about the fact that August and Kate began espousing different forms of my anxiety. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. And I think I had this original reluctance to talk about it because I wasn't talking about any part of myself. I was like totally in the closet to myself as well. Mm-hmm. And working through a lot of those concepts and struggles in my own books. And so it's become like, as I've become more comfortable in my own skin, I've become more open about and more self-reflective about which parts of the book are mine, you know? And it's such a weird thing. And I think people often think I'm really comfortable being so open and so vulnerable. And I do just want to like, I want to make it very clear. Like, I'm not comfortable doing that. It's a decision that I make because if my discomfort can make somebody else comfortable, I have an extreme privilege in terms of my support system. And so it's a decision I've made to be open, but like the more self-aware I become, the harder it is to have those dialogues with my work because I'm like so emotionally involved with them. Like I'm so deeply connected to it.
But I think that in this book in particular, that this book wouldn't have been possible the way that you wanted it to be from the beginning. I think one of the things that's so funny with you is from the beginning, you know, we have that original conversation where you're like, I have this new idea. And here's like, and at that point, it's like a kernel. That's like all it is.
It's like a deal with the devil that goes wrong.
It is in so many ways. And so many of your books are like that too, where like whatever happened in the book, I'm like, do you realize this is basically your life?
Except I remember pitching you Shades of Magic while I was walking through the snow back and forth in my front yard. And I was like, I think I want to write like a story about multiple worlds with magic and then somebody you can cross the line. Like it was so nonsensical. I'm amazed that you were like, that sounds good.
But all of your ideas always have that kernel. And the thing that like amazes me so much through multiple drafts, through books being rewritten completely, and everything that comes with that.
You don't talk about vengeful, Patricia.
No, but really, like the thing that's always been amazing to me is that where you end up in every single case. Number one is with a book, so that did happen. But number two is with the book that best reflects that kernel. Like in every single case, whatever you started with, whatever that little unformed thing that you truly wanted it to be at the heart of it, it's almost like you carry that through. And no matter what else changes, it's done when you can see that again. And I love that.
I won't quit until I can find it again. Because it's not about making, like, this is the weird thing. I guess you're right. It's never about creating a story. It's about creating the story that I intended to create. So it's like, I'm not willing to just set out on the adventure and be like, we'll see what kind of story we end up with. Like I set out with an immense amount of intention. And so what I confide to you in the beginning is the intention, right? I sit with you and I say, here's the intention of the thing that I want to make. Hold me to that intention. And I think we had that discussion when Addie was done finally, where you said, it is amazing to me I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, I'm paraphrasing, but you had said like, it is amazing to me that the thing that you created that is done now is so close to the intention that you declared.
Oh, I was a mess when I finished ADDIE. And it's so funny because I obviously like read ADDIE in pieces, like every day all the way through. But even for me, reading it that first time when you sent like the final book and it was like, okay, now you can read it from beginning to end. It was just a completely different experience. Like
I also told you. That's the worst part of your connection to this is I tell you everything that's going to happen because I just,
I'm not a spoiler person, and it drives it drives Eddie crazy. He's like, don't look at spoilers. And I'm like, no, I live for spoilers. So that part I'm okay with.
All my books for you.
The part I'm not okay with is where you purposely end things. Even if it's not the end of a chapter, you end the part you sent me at like the maximum pain point.
Because like in that beginning, because I am the opposite of a cheerleader, you are like holding my hope as well as that intention. So like so often in the beginning phases of a book, like you are also my cheerleader who's like reminding me of the intention, reminding me of what it is I'm trying to create, reminding me that I have been there before, like reminding me of all of these pieces because I become my own worst enemy when I'm drafting where, you know me, I'll try to delete the whole thing. I'll contact you and be like, you know what?
Times.
I'm going to delete it. And you're like, send it to me. I'll just hold on to it, you know?
Before we burn it down, let's just take a look and see what's going on.
Exactly.
But I think that goes into your process, which I always want to talk about because I know how many people come to your events that are writers or aspiring writers and want to hear about your process. And I have said to many people and to you to your face, to be fair, so this isn't mean, hearing about your process, I feel like has to make everyone else feel so much better.
That's so mean.
It's not though.
Okay, it's not mean. It's true.
It's like your process is so involved.
Terrible. It's terrible. I have the worst. So things about my process, I feel like everyone should know. And this is why Patricia puts up with so much. I write my books backwards, meaning like I find the ending and then I rewind everything from there to find the start. I then build an entire story skeleton, start to end, of every beat that I want to hit. I then create like small paragraphs for each of those beats. I then, as I'm writing, pull that paragraph out, put it in its own document and write the scene for it. I write that scene out of order in the sense that every single sentence in the scene is out of order. It's like dumping a puzzle onto a table for the first time, being like, and here are the pieces. I'll be like, now, I want this first sentence to feel like this. And I want this bit of dialogue to feel like this. And I want this descriptor. And I'll just start like cobbling together out of order. Like if I died suddenly and somebody opened the document of all of my in-process chapters, it would look like I had used a cipher. Like it looked like I used a fiction cipher. It only makes sense in my head. And then as I finish that scene, I slot it back into the place in the skeleton where the pitch was before. But it's nonsensical. It makes no sense to anyone except now you at this point, Patricia, because you've had to deal with it so many times where I'm like, here's chapter 19. And you're like, have I read chapter 18 yet? And I'm like, no, just read chapter 19.
Well, and the best part is I feel like if someone found your computer, it would be akin to that like scene in a movie where they like open the back closet of someone's room and there's like newspapers everywhere and string going like every which way.
Yes.
All
of that. Except the book that I just finished.
And that was my next point. Was that we can talk about the book, but we can talk about what happened.
Talk about the process. It's being pitched as, I can't tell you anything about it yet, except that it's being pitched as The Secret Garden meets Crimson Peak. The first book of my whole career that I wrote in order, which meant I could send you, Patricia, chapters like every day in order. But we also spent, I feel like, so much more time just in absolute awe. It's like, guess what? It happened again today. Here's the next chapter. I know. I was like, oh my God, Patricia, I wrote in order again. Like, and you were just like, I'm sorry, am I reading this book the way a normal person would read it? But I still ended the chapters and I didn't have any more of them.
Yeah, it still had pain points. But I will say, I think that part of that has to do with the type of story that it was, obviously. But part of it is I feel like karmically it had to be that like after what you went through to like bring ADDIE into this world, you kind of like just deserved a win.
Okay, that makes it sound really pitiful, but thank you.
It doesn't. Like
deserve a win.
Not a win, but like a win in terms of process. Obviously, ADDIE was the biggest win of all, but I feel like you just deserve to like have a process where like they do it a lot with birth, where it's like someone has a horrible birth, and the next one they're like, when our next one comes, it's gonna just fall out.
Let us remember that this book that I have recently finished, was such a painful process that I unmade it for 4 straight years. It was like building it, tear it down for 4 years before I sat down and wrote that book in order. So you got to pay for the scale on one side, you know?
That's true. It is a deal with the devil no matter how you slice it, I feel like.
But Addie was beautiful in that way because Addie happens across multiple timelines. I really could lean into my process of being like, today I'm going to write the French Revolution. And I would then like take the paragraph, like a book off the shelf, pull that paragraph out and start writing the French Revolution flashback. And then I could slot it back in. And the reason that was so important is like content warning. There is a scene in the book where a character considers committing suicide. It does not happen. I will be very upfront with that, but it is a consideration. And because there were so many really raw emotional beats over the course of the book, because I wrote it out of order, I could wait until I was emotionally equipped to write the book I needed to write that day. Or to write the sequence I needed to write that day. So like I could wait until I felt like I was in the place to write the passionate scenes. And I could wait until I was in the place to write the terrified scenes. And so I had a luxury of leaning into the emotional cadence. I think that was only because this is a character novel and not like a classic plot novel. Like it's a character.
That's probably true. And also you had with 3 main characters, obviously, I mean, I don't think this is a spoiler. They're not like equal. It's not like 1/3 of the book is each of them. But I think because you had 3 different people, when something got overwhelming or when something was too much emotionally, or you just weren't in the place for it that day, you could switch to somebody else and kind of.
Well, and this gets to the concept of creative procrastination, which you know I am a fan of. And this kind of like allowed me to creatively procrastinate with my own novel because I knew once I started writing this book, I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I was going to quit. This is like, it was a fear-based process the entire time. It was like working like hope and fear just this far apart, right? Like hope was here, fear was right underneath it. And so I found that the one thing I didn't trust myself was stopping once I had started, because we knew how hard it was for the inertia to like get myself to start. So I found that by being able to creatively procrastinate on one storyline or one scene by jumping to a different scene was going to keep me moving through the story in a way that was productive.
That does make sense. I think also with the 3 of them, you had so much time to simmer this book. You know, you'd had like literally 9 years, I feel like, at the time when you started writing it to really think about it. That you were just like there already, like in so many of the scenes, like some of them you talked about years before. I remember when we were in Nashville, I think we were packing up the Nashville house and like we were like finding papers that like, first of all, you were about to throw out, I just want to point out, but also that just had like random snippets that like, belonged in ADSOM or like belonged with Addie. And a couple of those like ended up being in the final book, even though that paper is probably long gone and you haven't.
Oh yeah, I lost it. I threw it out.
It's like crazy to me that but the things that stuck stayed. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I went back right before I started drafting and I found my Scrivener file in which I had kept essentially 8 years of notes. And I did not let myself use any of it, right? Because I thought to myself, like, you wrote that as 8 different people, right? 8 different years of your life. And I wasn't going to be writing those books as 25-year-old me, 27-year-old me, 30-year-old me. I was writing them as 31-year-old me. And that meant that I needed to see what stuck and trust my own mind that, like, if a thing was worth keeping, it would reemerge, you know? But it is like, I mean, hopefully, I don't know if it did or not.
It absolutely did. But that actually was one of the things I wanted to have you talk about was, and I get that this is a little harder to do spoiler free, but I think it's possible, of Addie, Luke, and Henry.
Yeah.
Which one of the 3 of them do you feel like changed the most from your original idea of them to the end?
Oh, okay. So this is fascinating. So Henry does not, because Henry was really like a placeholder stock figure as the conception and then became a real person, right? So I feel like I discount him. Addie, when I first had the idea for the story, Addie was your classic immortal, existential ennui, tired as shit, doesn't want to do this anymore, looking for the door out. And I realized that that did not work fundamentally because I needed her personality to be something that stubborn hope and defiant joy, what that would become as the mantra for her existence through revision, which is that like I needed her to have a personality fundamentally different to my own. I needed her to be somebody who just like was a constant silver linings, person because when she makes this deal with the devil, spite is only going to carry her for a handful of years.
I will say, I feel like Petty carried her pretty far in some sense.
Petty carries her for like the first 50. Yeah. And then Hope carries her for the other 250.
Yeah.
But what I will say, so she changed 180 degrees in terms of the kind of person I thought she would be when I started writing her. I really started out with her being much more fatigued with existence. Mm-hmm. She is tired, she's weary, but she never lets go of hope in this version. But Luke started out as just like a personification, right? A god. And what I realized over the course of maturing as a human through my 20s was that like when you take a monotheism and you make it a polytheism, when you take a god with a big G and you make it a god with a lowercase g, and you look at like Greco-Roman pantheons or Norse pantheons, the beautiful thing about these gods is that they get to be really flawed. They get to be super messed up. Like they have all of our strengths and all of our weaknesses. They become really, really good mirrors to the human civilizations that worship them. And so the biggest change to Luke's character over writing it was realizing like I wanted him to be a petulant child. Like I didn't want to envision the devil or the old god of promise, which is basically what he is, like a god of night and promise. I didn't want to envision him as like this omnipotent, mysterious, distant, vacuous force. Like he is a temper tantrum throwing like teenage boy. Like he is so immature. He's so selfish. He's so covetous. And I loved that about him because getting to make him human in that way made him so much more interesting.
But do you know what all of that says to me?
Right.
It says that he cares.
Nah. Yes, he does care. That's the whole problem. Well, that's a question mark. The question mark of this book, readers, does the devil care?
He does.
I don't know. It really depends on how, like I will say there's a lot of ambiguity in this book that I hope readers can bring their own take to in terms of like motivation. Like the actions are not ambiguous. The motivations for the actions are ambiguous. There's a way to read this book wherein you believe the devil doesn't give a shit and it's all manipulation. There's a way to read this book in which you believe the devil is genuinely like a very human and empathetic character.
Well, and it's funny. I think it's also what the individual person brings to it. And I've had conversations as friends, got arcs and as the book came out, even the ones who finished it already since it just came out on Tuesday, who feel very differently to me on that subject. And I am like going to go to my grave feeling that way. But it is funny to me how when people explain why they feel the way they do, you see how much of each person's personal perspective they're bringing to the reading of this book and how that changes it.
Well, and I love that because I think there's this misnomer that the author dictates the reading experience, but we don't. Like the author brings 50% of the story, the reader brings the other 50%. I will only ever be able to control 50% of the narrative. I can never control who the reader is. And that's, I think, like one of the beautiful things and one of the difficult things about the subjectivity of readership. But I've learned to embrace that, I think, better than I used to. It's hard. But
well, anything that lacks control is hard.
Yeah. I'm not really good at anything that lacks control. I really picked the wrong industry, Patricia.
Multiple times.
I started in astrophysics. I started in math and science. There was a lot of control. I don't know how I got here. I also keep shifting closer because I realized that it's going to cut off my 5 head at a 4 head if I aim it right about.
Yeah, there you go.
Right?
We can both do that. It'll be great.
I love it. Or I sit back here. It's just like, wow, the forehead just keeps going.
Anyway, I've seen a lot of people in the chat asking about the historical research that you did. And this is like one of my favorite questions because not only from the historical side, but from the contemporary side, hearing you talk about what's real and what's not.
Yeah. Well, so this is the interesting thing. And I think an interactive map is going to go live next week that I'm really excited for. It's a map of New York City. And I got to create things that aren't real and then fold them in alongside things that are real and try and make it so you can't tell which is which. Because that became, I know for years we talked about it either has to be all real, every character she has to engage with is historical and accurate, or it's none real. And we make it up as we go. And in the end, I decided for a 50-50 take, which is the goal of can I make the reader believe it's all real and not tell the reader which is which? So half the places And also I think that comes to the fact that like I'm used to creating magical systems from scratch and like big settings, and I couldn't do that. So I translated that desire into creating specificity of place, like a club, a festival, an experience that was like very molded as if it were fantastical. So the goal is that you as the reader can't tell which is real and which is not. I will tell you, half the places that Addie goes in New York City are real. And the other half are not.
And it will probably surprise a lot of people which is which.
Which is which. Yeah, that's my hope. That's my hope. But from, historical research, this is, I will never get tired of telling this story because it amuses me to no end. I did so much. I went to every single place that I wrote about. As I traveled to these places over the years, I asked myself, knowing I would only have a very limited amount of time to write them as flashbacks, if I only had a paragraph to convey an entire city, how would I do it? What would I pick? What would the details be that Addie would notice, right? I like worked as I was touring every place I went, I would ask myself, how would Addie interact with this place? So years of research, just like feeling pretty dedicated, feeling pretty like, yeah, not bad. So much research. I messed up so badly that it was caught in like the first, not even the first past pages, an ARC reader caught. And this is to tell you, authors, we try very hard. And somehow we still mess up.
There's always something.
I got all the way to ARCs before realizing. So there's a scene that happens with a man named Remy in Paris. And they go up to Notre Dame to look out over the city. Up until the ARC, they went to the Sacré-Cœur to look out over the city of Montmartre. I didn't find out until an ARC reader informed me. This got through every single editor and proofreader. The Sacré-Cœur had not been built yet, and not for another like 100 years. And I was like, of all the things, of all of it, like you just don't know. I at one point, and I know that it's wrong in the first printing, I am very sorry, messed up with the artist on a very famous work of art. I got it like 50-50. I would have lost this on like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, clearly. Like I think it was Vermeer and I said Rembrandt because like my brain one day and I thought, oh, my proofreader will catch that if it's wrong. Nobody did. So the answer is a lot of research and never enough. And that's because like, it's 300 years. I can't believe that I read books upon books about the French salon scene in the 1750s and then messed up the Sacré-Cœur.
But I feel like, again, it's 300 years and you did a significant amount of research, not only in the historical stuff, but in the contemporary pieces, because she's not just in New York. You know, you looked at, you went to other places in the US and I don't know where she goes, but like she does travel quite a bit. And so you had to do contemporary like research as well. And yeah, you had like 9 years, but I don't feel like you did the majority of that research until those last couple of years when you knew like when you were closer to the shape of the story.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like I still did my best, and I just take it as like, this is not a pity play. This is more you can do a lot of work and still, it's the same reason like everyone out there will find a typo in a book, right? The number of people whose eyes touch that book is astonishing. The fact a typo still got through is inevitable. It is not like an example of people not paying enough attention. It's just the way the machine works. It's just something always makes it through.
True. But that's what makes it special.
Sure. If you guys are out there and you have a first printing of ADDIE LARUE, I'm pretty sure I said Rembrandt when I meant Vermeer.
But like the thing is, the reality with that also is that doesn't change the experience of the book. It's not like, oh, that was supposed to be Vermeer. That would have changed my entire experience of reading that scene.
I'm just such an anal retentive person that I can't believe I messed that one detail up. But I do, I also am a fantasy author, and it's been really interesting writing this and the City of Ghosts series, which are set firmly in our world. Up until Addie, the most historical research I've ever had to do was for City of Ghosts. Because I don't think people realize with that middle grade series that every single ghost story is a real recorded ghost story. Every single place is a real recorded. Like the amount of research I did for my kids' books, like puts Shades of Magic to shame.
But Shades of Magic also, I feel like it's a different emotional amount of research.
Let's call this the book with the most emotional research.
Yeah, I love that. That's accurate, right? Like you put so much, I think, not only did you put who you are now and like tell this story from the perspective of who you are now, this I think is the book that encompasses the most of who you were at different points in your life and what you brought forward.
I know, it's
Which is
weird.
amazing.
Weird to grow a decade while writing a book for a decade, because I think there's this, this idea that, I mean, books are static. Once a book becomes published, it's a static entity, but authors continue to grow.
Yeah.
So like I started this story when I was 23 and I finished it when I was 33.
Mhm.
And like when I look at who I was at 23, I was a fundamentally different person.
Yeah.
And so weird to grow with a character and alongside a story in this way. Nothing even comes close.
It's also what I think made it harder to let this one go. Like, I think that coming to the end, I'm
not ready.
I know.
I'm hoping, working on the film stuff has been exciting because so I went from putting in like the final copy editing changes on the book to writing the script. And that was nice because, I went through like a deep mourning process after ADDIE where I was convinced I'd like never write again. And that like there was this open grave. It became very melodramatic, right? It still is. Let's not lie.
I wasn't going to call you out, but yeah.
It was very melodramatic. But like writing the script allowed me to keep the door open and feel like the story wasn't finished yet. And it was really a mercy because I was not ready to emotionally let go. And so getting to then re-envision the story in a different format, like felt like holding on a little bit longer.
But also I think it gave you, in a weird way, some distance too, because when you had to reimagine it for the script is so beautiful. And it has all the beautiful parts of the book, but it's also different. It's also not exactly the same. And so as opposed to like living with this one thing that you had to let go of, I think getting to do something that was like related but removed probably helped like shift away a little bit.
It is helping me keep the door open inside my heart because like as it works its way through the world and the system and the process, it's like, oh, maybe we'll keep it alive a little bit longer because it is standalone. It is standalone.
You can tell me if I'm wrong. I'm probably not though. Even if you say I am. I feel like we've had a conversation many times about you reading your books later. And the answer has always been, I'm not reading this book again. Like once it's done, goodbye. Especially there's some of them that you don't even want to look at. But
there's some that I'm like, you get in the corner. Yeah. Think about what you did.
But to me, this one is the one that I feel like at certain points in your life, you will go back to because it'll be an experience for you in how you've grown in the next 10 years, or the 10 years after that.
I hope so. I worry. I don't worry. I think that I will feel comfortable revisiting this book when I have a new thing that takes this much space inside my heart. Right now, I'm still like deeply frightened that I won't have another thing that takes this kind of space. And maybe it's just because right now this is so different to anything I've ever done that it feels very one of a kind in that way. And I think that one of a kindness is a little bit scary because it's like, oh, was it an interstitial? Was it an interlude in my career that I'm never going to have that sensation again? I don't know. I'm still obviously dealing with that.
It was the first one that you had that had the through line for that long. And so I feel like in some ways, you don't know how long that was building before that. So it'd be impossible to know whether or not something is already
so different. Like it's so different from everything else that I've written, which, for a long time I felt it was a weakness. And now I've come to terms with the fact that it's different. But I think I fear that I'll just like, well, that was a step off the path and now I'll step back on my path. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm passionate about my path. But some little part of me was like, it was my love affair. Right? Like I had a love affair with this book, with this story, with this characters. It lasted a decade. And now I'm like monogamous again. And I'm like, where's my side piece? Like, where's my, no, seriously, like, where's the thing I'm going to make eyes at in the corner of the room?
And like, meanwhile, everyone else is having a love affair with ADDIE.
It's like it's the weirdest thing, right? Because like, I miss having a thing that is entirely mine.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna ask questions because we're gonna run out of time. We could do this all night.
I know. Also, I just miss your face.
I know. I miss your face too. It's been one of the hardest parts of lockdown in general. Is just we have so few times we see each other in person, and book launches are always one of them. And so,
all right. To the questions. Also, I'm gonna refill my drink in case anyone's wondering. It is Writer's Tears Japanese cask finish that was gifted to me by Sarah Maria Griffin. That was a way too big pour. Okay.
Especially for not having had dinner. Okay, so this is a really good question. Someone asked, do you sometimes find yourself wanting to go in another direction that takes you away from your intention? And what happens then?
Ooh,
That's a really good question.
Have I? I feel like usually I scrap the book and start again. Like I feel like that has happened.
That's exactly what happens.
but that usually does not happen at the drafting point for me because I'm like a very rigid planner, outliner. It's one of the reasons this book I just finished took 4 years is because I would plan the whole thing. It would veer off course or feel wrong. I would delete the whole outline and start again. So usually I catch that rogue intention in the skeleton phase, not in the writing phase. Do you feel like that's accurate, Patricia?
Yeah, I feel like that's true. And I think also it's an interesting thing to say, you know, wanting something that takes you away from your intention. I think the key thing there is away from your intention. Yeah. Because you can have like a rogue idea that's taking you off, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean that was replacing the intention, or that I don't think you've ever had one where something that you went off in another direction was better than the original intention. I feel like it always comes back to the original intention.
It always comes back. I will say I almost named it, but like the book that I just finished, it was it took a long time to find the right intention for that book, for that idea. I had the kernel, but I didn't have the right intention. The reason I have to ask Patricia this is because you have a much more bird's eye view, I think, of my process than I do. Because in the process, I just look like the Scream painting. I actually found a gift the other day that's just a creature like covering itself with sand. And I was like, that's my process.
That is. Someone asked the question for both of us, what is the funniest moment you've had together in your working together as friends?
Oh man, I'm not sure it's ever funny, haha. I do remember.
I find it funny, haha, all the time.
I remember being so stressed and overwhelmed that we did an event and then we ordered like $50 worth of, was it like Turkish food?
It was. I think it was more than $50 worth. We ordered
so much Turkish food. And then we couldn't eat any of it. No. We took it back to the hotel room. We were so exhausted. We laid down on the hotel room floor, which is a thing you should never do. That's not a clean place. And then we could not open the food. The very smell of it made both of us a little bit queasy after that event. And we were just oh no, what are we going to do? And we kept just staring at the food and we were why did we do this?
Why did we make this choice? Yeah, that's probably true. I think that's probably.
But it's usually something to deal with our ineptitude.
I would say especially when traveling or being somewhere, I will always say to my dying day that the funniest thing was when we were packing and you were putting things in a laundry basket and it was you didn't have boxes. And I had to come in and be so first step, let's get some boxes.
This is when I was leaving Nashville. No, actually, I think my favorite thing was when I made you come over and help organize all of the bookshelves by color. And it seeded a deep existential crisis about the difference between cerulean and blue, where you stared at a shelf of green books for about an hour. And then you said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. It was about 5,000 books.
To this day, and I have one right behind me that's the exception, which is the house in the cerulean sea, because that's amazing. So it gets to be an exception. But to this day, I will not buy books that have multiple colors on the spine because I'm still so traumatized.
We had to create an entire cabinet that was for the sad books because they couldn't go on my rainbow bookshelves because they had too many colors on the spine.
To be clear, they were not sad books. They were wonderful books.
No. But that process broke you because that was such a friendship thing where you're I will come to Nashville and I will help you. And then you saw the books and you were just oh God. And 4 days later, you were I hate everything about this.
I have told people since when they ask me for favors related to moving that I have done I've used up all of my favors for moving for my whole lifetime. And that unfortunately I cannot.
Yeah.
It definitely, that was a bonding experience for sure.
Also, I saw someone asked, this does not have a name yet, and it's really stressing me out. But right now, it's just pointy sad face.
Doctor.
It's just the plague doctor.
It's the plague doctor. I think that makes sense.
I didn't have a name for the first 2 weeks I was born. So, names don't have to come with you at the beginning.
They can find you later.
They can find you.
Let me see what else we have here.
There's so many questions.
There are so many questions. What is your favorite?
There's a lot of craft questions.
Yeah, that's what I was just looking at. What was your favorite part about working on the film stuff for ADDIE? That's a good question.
Ooh, okay, so here's the difference between a film and a book, in my opinion, which is that when you write a book, or any written form of story that's meant to be consumed with like as a written thing, I become intensely, as Patricia knows, intensely precious about wording, like intensely. And my editor Miriam knows this as well. Like we will poke at a syllable because it messes with the cadence of a line. Writing a film script was both intensely daunting because I was adapting my own thing, but it was also extraordinarily liberating because a film script is a living document, meaning like your job is to convey the heart and soul of a thing, but a viewer is never going to read the script and expect that to convey the movie. A director is going to interpret that script, an actor, an actress, actors are going to interpret that script, and they're going to bring the thing to life. So it felt in a lot of ways like it was the first time in years I got out of my own way. Because I just was like, oh, I think I just need to convey the heart of this.
I would say that's accurate. I think that's very true.
Yeah. Meanwhile, most of the time I'm just like paralyzed by inadequacy.
So to be fair, because I don't want people to take away the impression who don't know us that I'm like legitimately mean to you.
Except when you yell at me, sure.
I do genuinely love, and I do think that someone asked like what, for me, what changed the most. And I think one of the joys of the absolute honor of getting to read your work as you're working is that within people that read your books, people that read your books have such a deep love for them. And I do recognize that it is a huge blessing for me to have this compendium of everything that didn't make it into the book exists in my head. And I have a hard time with that sometimes because people will be talking and I'll be like, oh, but then this thing happened. And it's like, oh, I can't say that because that thing never happened. But there have been things I feel like in the past that were so that I held on to that were not right for the book, that actually would not have made sense to anyone, but I just personally loved them. Yeah. So and I know we've had extensive conversations where I'm like, well, in my head canon, this stayed. So there is a joy in parts of the process.
You get to live all of the futures and all the pasts that never made it all the way to the page.
That, which I think at times makes my head just as confusing of a place to be.
Especially with I think with the Shades of Magic series, where I would send you something and I would be like, never mind, that got cut.
Yeah,
and then I was like,
that one's wide. I'm expecting that again, I think, for Threads, because there's going to be new cast plus old cast, and I
become my mental archive where I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And you're like, well, this didn't happen in there, so it probably shouldn't happen here. And then I'm like, that is very fair.
Or that person, I think they died. They might have died.
There was a time I tried to kill them all, so it's very hard to track.
Well, especially in Shades. But I feel like also we've had conversations where you're like, oh, I'll read a section and it's like, I think you use this name in 2 other books.
I love it though. I'll use a Harker in every single book I can get my hands on. I can't help it. I don't know why.
I love it.
All right, wait. What was your favorite recent spooky read?
Oh, spooky read. I can't. Victoria can attest to the fact that I can't read scary things. And her books, the most recent spooky thing I read was the book you just finished.
Secret Garden, Crimson Peak.
That was my limit. There are certain books.
You don't like the feeling of dead things standing in the corner watching you?
There are certain things that you write. The middle grade series was another one where you would send me stuff and I would legitimately see it come through, especially with the time difference. You'd always send it at night for me. And I'd be like, I'm not reading this till daylight because I will not sleep tonight. And this is for children.
Yeah, that's my goal. My latest spooky read, I am really enjoying. So I'm trying to do family book club right now. And my dad is a really tricksy reader. He's hard to catch. And so, but he's enamored with Stephen King and always has been. So every now and then we throw a Stephen King into the book club pile. And so just read The Institute, which is not horror scary, but definitely scary in the way that Stephen King thrillers are always a bit unnerving. So I'd say probably The Institute by Stephen King.
I feel like I cheated by using your book.
That's okay. I'll allow it. Wait, okay, hold on. Wait, what else do we have? We have a lot of questions.
What do you do when you get stuck?
Quit. Discuss moving to Iceland to raise goats instead. That comes up at least once every 6 months. No, in all honesty, I don't believe in writer's block. The reason is I think there's a lot of reasons we get stuck. And I think that those kind of understanding how to get unstuck is about understanding why you get stuck in the first place. Are you stuck because, for me, it's most of the time, as Patricia points out, it's fear. Like, you are scared of doing this wrong. You have to do it wrong to do it right. Just write something down. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can't be perfect. Please, dear God, just write something down.
Or stop fixing it. That's the other one.
Stop fixing it along the way, because I'll just like nudge at it. Sometimes we're afraid or we're stuck because we don't know what happens next, which is its own problem, or we're bored. And if you as the author are bored, or the writer, if you don't want to put as much pressure on the term, but like, you are your first reader. It's most important that you be excited by what you're writing first. Like, you're going to have to live with it a lot longer than anybody else. And so I think a lot of getting unstuck is dismantling why you got stuck in the first place. Are you being heavily distracted? Do you need to switch to pen and paper instead of computer? I switch to pen and paper when I'm plotting, because I find that it's easier for me to not click over to Instagram or get in my own head or like get just overwhelmed. And I'll just set myself a 10-minute timer, or even the length of a song that I really love, and say, just think, just brainstorm for this amount of time. I think a lot of the times it's about becoming unprecious.
Well, and I think the handwriting thing, we've talked about that before too, that I think sometimes when we would go out and we were sitting in like a coffee shop or something, and you're just like staring at the computer, not moving for a really long time, it would be like time to pull the notebook out, because it doesn't, something about writing on paper, weirdly, doesn't feel as permanent.
Agreed.
Which is so like counterintuitive, because it's more permanent than typing, for sure.
I know, but I think it's Donna Tartt that used to, maybe she still does, across the top of all of her pages, like, this is not important. So she would like pull out a notebook page, and then that blank notebook page starts to feel precious as well. So she would just scribble across the top of it. But truly, I find switching to pen and paper, if you're able, can be really liberating. It just takes some of that pressure off.
It's also because you have to do the motion of handwriting. I think it's a different, like, it just turns a different gear in your head. So it kind of gets you in a different place.
I also have like cultivated a slight Pavlovian response to listening to like a white noise. So I listen to rain at really loud volumes, like to the point where I can't hear anything else. And when I put my earbuds in and I turn that on, it is a trigger to my brain that like, okay, this is writing time now.
But I think also the other thing that you've done that's been really interesting lately, and I don't know to the extent that, I mean, we've obviously talked about some of it, you've mentioned it at least, is exploring other mediums, having, to the extent that this has worked, it has worked so well that I think you're like overwhelmed, but I think having other creative outlets besides just writing a book that still involve writing, also is another way that you use writing to get unstuck.
Yeah, it's productive procrastination in that way. And like, look, I have a board over here. See that? And the blue is books, and the green is comics, and the dark pink is scripts, and the light pink is short stories. And that's because some days I'm not equipped to work on a book-sized concept in my head, but I bet I could work on a couple pages of a comic. And so also challenging yourself, something that I did, I got really stuck on a story idea earlier this year. And I tried something drastic because I couldn't figure out the first 50 pages or so of this story idea. And I switched and I said, how would I write it as a pilot, like a TV pilot instead? This is where projects can come out in like 24. It's way far out. But I was just stuck. I was stuck on the action. And I decided to test myself and see, like, how would you structure it if this were a 45-minute television pilot? And it liberated these parts of my brain that I hadn't even realized I could use for this. And so try changing the medium. Try taking the preciousness. If you're getting stuck because you're being precious about wording, take the preciousness of wording out and think of it as a comic where you're truly just like framing and structuring the scene. I think that's kind of what I do when I set that paragraph at the top of my page. Is I'm taking the preciousness away and I'm saying, hey, all you need to do is expand this 4-sentence paragraph into a chapter.
I'm going to remind you of that because I feel like there are many days that you're like, oh, this isn't working. Like you said, you're going to go farm goats.
Yeah. That's my go-to. Okay,
we have time.
You know what? We have to be remembered. Okay, we have one to two more questions.
Yeah, we can do like 1 or 2 more questions.
I'll be brief. I'm capable.
What's the first thing you did when you finally finished this book? That's a good question.
First thing? I did 6 shots of tequila. Okay, no. That's not an appropriate answer. I did 1 shot of tequila. No, I was desperately sad for 6 months. I did not know how to exist without this story as a thing that I was working on. It's like weirdly like a divorce in my mind where I felt like I had created a piece of my identity based on a story and then it was gone.
But it's not gone.
It is gone though. I can't
not fun.
change it anymore.
That's okay. I think it is. I think it exists in what it was supposed to be. I think this is probably, we've talked a lot over the years, I think, about this, the concept that you have of like, you have a perfect idea and then you like have to completely destroy it to get back to, you know, what you wanted. This is probably, not even from my perspective, but from having you say it to me, the closest I think you've ever come to getting something as close to that like perfect thing as you, to getting all the way back to as close to that as you have.
It is. It is. I know. I'm still just sad because I miss thinking about Addie every day and wondering how she would interact with something.
But you can still do that, you know.
I know, but then it kind of just becomes madness, right? Like if you don't have a book to write, that just becomes a voice in your head, Patricia. Like,
Yeah, that is fair.
That
But
becomes an imaginary friend.
I mean, that's not the worst thing.
It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying we got to call it what it is, which is an imaginary friend. Do you want to pick one more question, even though we're running out of time? Because I don't want it to be over yet.
I know.
Are they going to kick us out? Where's the voice of God? I don't want it to be out yet.
I'm going to be like, I never.
I don't want it to be done yet.
I won't kick you out. We can have a couple more questions.
Can we have at least one more question?
Of course.
I'm not ready yet.
This is so much pressure to like, these are such good questions.
No,
and like the last one.
Pick right.
Jenna would like to know where you're sitting.
Okay, this is driving me crazy because Jenna is my surrogate sister who has also been texting my mother on my phone off screen. And I would like to point out that I am sitting right next to my desk. Look, there's a desk right there. I am sitting in front of a bookshelf. There is a mantle place that has more books because they go everywhere. And what Jenna, I believe, thinks is like a washing machine is actually a picture of my dog that was drawn by a close family friend. So I'm sitting in I'm sitting in the house next door to my house, which is a weird thing to say, but my family and I have been on lockdown in France. I should be very specific. My family lives in France. Mm-hmm. It's not like we vacationed for lockdown. My family lives in the French countryside. Interestingly, about 10 minutes from where the book is set. There's a reason for that. We live in the Sarthe, and the book is set in the Sarthe, really close to Le Mans, if anyone's familiar with France. And I came down here in March with a carry-on suitcase because I thought I'll be here for maybe like a couple weeks. I don't know why. The world was a different place. And that was like 7 months ago. And so my parents had a gîte, like an Airbnb next door to their house, which is a 600-year-old stone cottage with very little internet. And so I co-opted the entire gîte. So you can see it's a absolute mess right now, but like, there's my violin. There's flowers that my parents gave me on release day.
Those are beautiful.
There's a puzzle happening way over there for stress. So I co-opted the gîte in order for me to have a place so that I didn't kill my parents and bury them in our backyard because I love them all. But like,
I miss your parents. They're wonderful.
But also there are 3 dogs, 3 cats, and 6 chickens next door. And it is a very hard place to find any form of focus. So I co-opted this place next door. But the great irony of it, as Patricia knows, is that I don't know how to write at home. I've only ever written at coffee shops, but I have no choice. So every time I finish a book, I move my entire desk to a different part of the apartment. And I try to like recreate a new environment for myself. And so I've now moved this desk 3 times.
That's amazing. My favorite thing about that is it's so much like when you're a little kid and you like clean and reorganize your room and then you go get your parents and you're like, whole new space, whole new me.
I did that. I dragged my family over here when I rearranged all of the furniture and they were like, okay, so what? And I was like, do you see what I have done? It's like a whole new space. And they were like, it just looks like you made a mess. And also, where are we supposed to put this furniture? So yeah, that's where I am. I am in a tiny gîte next door to my house.
All right. I have the perfect last question because I know this one has a good answer. Yes. Someone asked what the theme song to Addie would be. And so I wanted you to talk about the amazing playlist for Addie.
Oh, yeah. This is a great one to end on because I'm an interesting person in that there was more to that sentence.
Period.
I'm an interesting person, period. I'm an interesting person in that I don't write to music. As I've said, I write to white noise. I write to thunderstorms, but I dream to music. I think to music. I do all of the writing parts that are not typing to music. And so over the course of thinking and brainstorming and revising this book, I had several, probably half a dozen songs that really aided me. And my editor, Miriam, had her own half a dozen songs that aided her in the editing of the book. And so if you go to IrememberAddie.com, we have combined our songs into one playlist that you can listen to through Spotify. And it kind of gives you a sense of the book. But I would say that if you are just looking to like go to YouTube or Spotify and tack on a single album with which to read, you could do any Florence and the Machine album, and that would pretty much be the perfect backdrop to this book.
I would say that's true. This has been so much fun. I'm so excited that we always get to do it with One More Page. We're like so lucky being in the DMV that we have One More Page because they're just the absolute best. So I always love that, and among the many wonderful things about them, that they bring you to visit me.
Yes. It's amazing. Rebecca, come back to us.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. But yes, thank you so much for being here. This was a wonderful event. Thank you, everyone, for commenting and giving us your fabulous questions. I wish we could keep going, but people got to do stuff, I guess. I don't know.
Whatever. Is it a Friday?
It is.
It is. I did have to think about that, though.
Now, and I was thinking, like, what better things do you have to do? Just open a drink, hang out with me in the middle of the night in France.
I was going to say,
I have a family.
And then go to sleep.
You need to eat and go to sleep. But
amazing.
This is so delightful. One More Page is one of my favorite bookstores in the entire world. Patricia is one of my favorite people in the entire world. The entire staff of One More Page, Rebecca, is just like my heart happy place and has been for 6-7 years now.
Mm-hmm. Many moons, but you are one of our favorites also. Every time we're like, but have you read Victoria Schwab though?
I am just so honored that I got to do this, that I got to spend time with one of my best friends in the world, that I got to support one of my favorite bookstores in the world, and then I got to do it with readers. I know this is a really unconventional year. I know things are strange and scary, but I think that fiction and escape are some of the most important things right now in terms of self-care. And so I just want to thank everyone for engaging in an act of self-care by coming to spend an hour or so listening to me ramble about books and making shit up for a living with Patricia.
I'm so excited that they all get to read Addie now because it's been forever and now they all get to experience it, and I'm happy for each and every one of them.
Everyone find me on Twitter. I read an arc, so like I know your pain that you're going through right now. So thank you all so much again. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, all of you watchers and listeners. And we will see you next time. Gonna end the broadcast. It does take an awkward amount of time, though.